I'd love to have them. And she took the pick of the Russian jewels. Whether she ever paid for them in full at the proper price is very doubtful.
There is a collection sitting inside the British royal household right now that has no equal, not in financial value, not in history, not in raw emotional power. Can you take a guess on who it belonged to? It was not for the prestigious queens that held the British monarchy. It belonged to Diana. For years, the question of who would ultimately control it hung over the palace like a storm cloud that never quite broke. Then quietly, without fanfare, without a single headline announcing it, the answer arrived. Catherine has it. All of it. The rings, the tiaras, the pearls, the pieces Diana used like weapons and wore like war paint. Every single one of them. Camilla, the woman who finally won the crown, she spent 3 decades fighting to reach, walks away with nothing from Diana's world. Not one piece. Not one corner of the legacy she spent 30 years competing against. Nothing at all. When people talk about Diana's jewelry, they imagine tiaras under glass, museum pieces, relics behind velvet rope. That is not what this is. Diana's collection was never just decoration. Every single piece she wore was a decision, a calculated, deliberate, sometimes devastating decision. And once you understand that, everything about this story changes. Think about the sapphire engagement ring, 12 carats, oval salon sapphire, 14 round diamonds set in 18-karat white gold. Charles did not personally select it. It came from a catalog, a ready-made piece from the Garrard jewelry house that any member of the public could have ordered. Diana chose it herself. And that choice, that one small act of independence inside a process she had almost no control over, told you everything about who she was going to be inside that marriage. She was not going to be passive. She was not going to be decorative. She was going to make her own statements. That ring became the most famous piece of jewelry in the world, not because of what it cost, because of what it meant, because of the woman who wore it and the story it survived. Now, think about the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara. Queen Mary commissioned it in 1914. It passed to Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth lent it to Diana. Diana wore it constantly, at state banquets, at formal dinners, at moments when the weight of her marriage was already visible in her eyes. There are photographs of Diana wearing that tiara that stop you cold, not because it is beautiful, though it is, because of the expression on her face beneath it, resigned, regal, quietly furious. She wore that tiara the way a soldier wears a uniform, with pride, with discipline, and with the full understanding that the battle was ongoing. Here is what most people do not know about Diana's collection. It was not inherited, not most of it. Some pieces came through royal channels, gifts from the Queen, loans from the royal family's private collection. But Diana actively built her own collection during her marriage and after it. She received extraordinary pieces as gifts during royal tours. Saudi Arabia alone gave her jewelry worth millions. India, Australia, the Gulf states. Everywhere the Wales couple traveled, Diana returned with pieces that told the story of where she had been and who had welcomed her. She was not passive about any of it. She worked with jewelry houses directly. She had pieces reset, redesigned, reimagined. A pearl choker became a headband at a state banquet in 1985, worn that way deliberately, breaking protocol with a smile, daring anyone to say something. Nobody did, because by that point, Diana had understood something the palace had not yet accepted. She was the story, not Charles, not the institution, her. When the marriage collapsed and the separation became official in 1992, the question of the collection became legally complicated. The crown jewels were never hers to keep. Those belonged to the state, held in trust across generations, worn but never owned by any individual monarch or consort. But Diana's personal pieces were different. Under the divorce settlement finalized in 1996, Diana retained the jewelry she had accumulated during the marriage. Not everything. Negotiations were involved, and the palace was not generous. But the most personally significant pieces, the ones with her fingerprints on them, the ones she had worn and chosen and deliberately deployed, those stayed with her. She walked away from that marriage with a collection that was worth a fortune in financial terms. But its real value was never financial. Its real value was symbolic, historical, emotional. Those pieces were proof that Diana had existed, had mattered, had shaped the story of the British monarchy in ways no amount of institutional management could erase. Then August 1997 arrived, and everything changed. Diana died in Paris. She was 36 years old. Her estate, valued at approximately £21.5 million at the time of probate, passed to her sons, not to the palace, not to Charles, not to the institution that had spent years trying to manage her, to William and Harry, two grieving young men who had just lost their mother and now legally owned the most emotionally powerful collection in the British monarchy's modern history. And inside that estate, carefully listed, painstakingly documented, sat the collection. Every piece, every ring, tiara, bracelet, choker, and earring that Diana had worn on the world's biggest stages. All of it now belonged to two grieving young men who had just lost their mother. Here is the question that nobody was asking loudly enough back then. What happens to a collection this powerful when the woman who gave it meaning is gone? Will it become a museum exhibit, a diplomatic gift, a footnote in a probate filing? Or does it find someone worthy of carrying it forward? That question sat unanswered for years, quietly, patiently, while William grew up, while he found Catherine, while he watched the palace navigate the complicated business of welcoming Camilla, the woman his mother had called the third person in her marriage. The collection waited, and then, piece by piece, decision by decision, the answer started becoming clear. The sapphire ring moved from a probate inventory to Catherine's left hand. The lover's knot tiara came out of storage and onto Catherine's head at state banquets where the whole world was watching. The pearl pieces appeared at remembrance services, at royal tours, at the moments of maximum visibility and emotional weight. Diana's collection did not end up in a museum. It ended up exactly where one person had quietly decided it would go. And that person was not Camilla. It was never going to be Camilla. Here is something the palace will never put in a press release. The reason Camilla never had a chance at Diana's collection was not personal. It was not emotional. It was not even about William's feelings toward his stepmother. It was about the law. And the law, in this case, was never on Camilla's side. Not for a single day. To understand how Diana's collection ended up where it did, you have to understand how royal jewelry actually moves between generations. Most people assume the palace controls everything, that some senior courtier sits in a wood-paneled office and decides who wears what and when. That is true for some pieces, but not all of them, not even most of them. Royal jewelry falls into three distinct categories, and which category a piece sits in determines everything about who can touch it, who can wear it, and who can inherit it. The first category is the crown jewels. These belong to the state, full stop. The imperial state crown, the sovereign's orb, the coronation regalia. These pieces are not owned by any individual. They are held in trust by the monarch on behalf of the nation. No king, no queen, no consort can give them away, sell them, or pass them privately to a family member. They exist outside personal inheritance entirely. Camilla wore the modified George IV state diadem at the coronation in May 2023. She wore it because she was queen consort at that moment in that ceremony, not because anyone gave it to her, not because it was hers. The second category is privately owned royal jewelry. This is where things get complicated and interesting. Privately owned pieces are exactly what they sound like. Jewelry purchased personally, received as private gifts, or inherited through family lines outside official royal channels. Queen Elizabeth II owned an extraordinary private collection. Some pieces she inherited from Queen Mary, others she received as gifts during her reign. Privately owned pieces belong to the individual, not the institution. When Elizabeth died in September 2022, her private jewelry passed according to her personal wishes. Charles inherited some pieces. Specific items were directed to specific family members. But here is the critical point most people miss. Elizabeth's private collection and Diana's private collection were two entirely separate things. When Elizabeth passed her private jewelry to her heirs, Diana's pieces were not included, because Diana's pieces were never Elizabeth's to give. They had not been Elizabeth's property since the divorce settlement of 1996. The third category is the gray area, and this is where palaces quietly go to war. Gifts from the sovereign occupy complicated legal and emotional territory. When a reigning monarch gives a piece of jewelry to a family member, the question of ownership becomes murky. Was it a personal gift? an institutional loan, a piece expected to remain within royal circles regardless of who receives it. During Diana's marriage, some pieces were loans from the royal family's private collection. The Spencer tiara, for instance, belonged to the Spencer family and was worn by Diana at her wedding. That piece never entered the equation at all. But the lover's knot tiara was different. Queen Mary commissioned it. Queen Elizabeth owned it. Elizabeth lent it to Diana. Diana wore it obsessively across more than a decade of public life. When Diana died, the tiara returned to the royal collection. Elizabeth reclaimed it quietly. It sat in storage for years. Then, Elizabeth made a decision. She lent it to Catherine after the Wales wedding in 2011. That single decision, made by a 90-year-old queen who understood the weight of symbols better than anyone alive, effectively settled the question of where Diana's visual legacy would live. Elizabeth did not give it to Camilla. She gave it to Catherine. Now here is the piece of this story that truly matters. Diana's personal jewelry, the pieces she retained after the divorce, did not pass through the palace at all. They passed through her will. Diana's estate was administered by her executors and distributed to her sons when they came of age. William and Harry each received portions of their mother's personal effects. The specific division of the jewelry has never been fully disclosed publicly, but the results are visible to anyone paying attention. William received the sapphire engagement ring. He held it for years. When he proposed to Catherine on October 2010 during a trip to Kenya, he placed his mother's ring on Catherine's finger. That was not a palace decision. That was a son's decision. William chose that ring deliberately. He carried it in his rucksack for 3 weeks in Kenya before he proposed, terrified of losing it. Think about that for a moment. He did not reach for a new ring from a jewelry house. He reached for his mother, and in doing so, he placed Diana's most recognizable piece permanently inside the Wales household, permanently beyond Camilla's reach, before Camilla had even been crowned. This is the architecture nobody talks about openly. The legal framework meant Charles could not redirect Diana's personal pieces toward Camilla, even if he wanted to. The sovereign's lending decisions meant Elizabeth had already signaled where the lover's knot tiara belonged. Anne William's personal choices meant the most emotionally significant piece of all, the engagement ring Diana had worn on every front page in the world, was already on Catherine's hand before the coronation was even a conversation. Camilla was crowned queen consort in May 2023, but the jewelry that makes the world feel something when a royal woman walks into a room, that had already been settled years earlier, quietly, legally, irrevocably. So, what exactly does Catherine now control, and how has she used these pieces to rewrite the story? That is what we are getting into next, and the precision with which she has done it will surprise you. There is a photograph that tells this entire story without a single word. Catherine is standing at the top of a grand staircase. She is wearing a white gown. Around her neck, a pearl choker that Diana wore to a state banquet in the 1980s. On her head, the Cambridge lover's knot tiara, the one Diana wore so often that royal watchers called it her favorite. She is not trying to look like Diana. She does not need to. The jewelry does it for her. And somewhere in that moment, the transfer that nobody officially announced became impossible to ignore. Let us talk about what Catherine actually controls now. Because this is not a rumor. This is not speculation dressed up as insider reporting. This is visible, documented, worn in public, on the world's biggest stages, in front of cameras that broadcast to hundreds of millions of people. The 12-carat oval Ceylon sapphire, set in white gold, surrounded by 14 round diamonds. It has been on Catherine's finger since November 2010, when William proposed in Kenya. That ring was Diana's most photographed piece. It appeared on front pages across the world from the moment Diana accepted Charles's proposal in February 1981. Every significant moment of Diana's public life has a version of that ring somewhere in the frame. Now it belongs to Catherine, not on loan, not borrowed for occasions, permanently, daily, hers. When Catherine steps out for a school run, that ring is there. When she sits beside world leaders at state dinners, that ring is there. When she stands on a balcony at Buckingham Palace while the world watches, that ring is the first thing every camera finds. Diana's most iconic piece has become Catherine's most constant accessory. That is not an accident. Now, look at the Cambridge lover's knot tiara. This piece has a history that stretches back over a century. Queen Mary commissioned it in 1914, modeled on a tiara belonging to her great-aunt, Princess Augusta Caroline of Hesse. Queen Elizabeth II inherited it. She lent it to Diana. Diana wore it at least 15 times across her years as Princess of Wales, more than almost any other tiara in the royal collection. When Diana died, it returned to the Queen's keeping. It sat in storage for nearly a decade. Then Catherine became Princess of Wales, and the tiara came back out. Elizabeth lent it to Catherine, and Catherine has worn it at the most significant moments of her public life. She wore it at the state banquet for the President of China on October 2015. She wore it at the state banquet for the King and Queen of Spain on July 2017. She wore it at the state banquet hosted for the South Korean president on November 2022, just weeks after becoming Princess of Wales following the Queen's death. That last appearance was not a coincidence. Catherine wore Diana's most beloved tiara at her first major state banquet as Princess of Wales. She was not easing into the role, she was making a statement on the first possible occasion. Here is the micro question worth sitting with for a moment. Is Catherine doing this deliberately? Is she consciously positioning herself as Diana's successor through the jewelry she chooses? The answer, based on everything we know about how Catherine operates, is yes. But not in the way you might think. Catherine is not performing grief. She is not staging a tribute act. She is completing something. Diana built a visual language with her jewelry, a language the public learned to read fluently. When Diana wore the lover's knot tiara, it communicated strength, continuity, a woman holding her ground inside an institution that was not always kind to her. Catherine understands that language, and she has chosen to speak it. Beyond the ring and the tiara, the transfer runs deeper than most people realize. The South Sea pearl drop earrings that Diana wore to the premiere of Steel Magnolias in London in 1989 have appeared on Catherine at multiple formal occasions. The pearl and diamond choker that Diana famously wore as a headband at a 1985 state banquet, the one that made every front page in Britain the next morning, has been worn by Catherine in its original form at remembrance events, sitting quietly at her throat while she stands at the cenotaph. The aquamarine cocktail ring that Diana wore on her final public engagement in July 1997 has been seen on Catherine's right hand at private events, piece by piece, occasion by occasion, year by year. The collection has migrated from a probate inventory compiled in a solicitor's office in the autumn of 1997 to the wrist, neck, and ears of the woman who will one day be Queen of England. And this is the part that makes the transfer feel complete rather than coincidental. Catherine does not wear these pieces randomly. She wears them at moments of maximum emotional resonance. The lover's knot tiara appears at state banquets, the exact setting where Diana deployed it most powerfully. The pearl pieces appear at remembrance services, moments of national mourning and reflection, where Diana's humanitarian legacy carries the most weight. The engagement ring is present at every public engagement where Catherine meets ordinary people, the work Diana considered her most important contribution. Catherine is not raiding a wardrobe. She is following a map Diana drew with 30 years of careful, intentional public appearances, and Catherine has studied every single coordinate. So, what did Camilla receive? What did the woman who became Queen Consort walk away with from this transfer? That is the question sitting at the center of this entire story, and the answer is more complicated and more telling than most people expect. On the 6th of May 2023, Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey as Queen Consort. She wore the George IV state diadem on the journey there, a stunning piece, diamonds and gemstones set in silver and gold, commissioned in 1820 for the coronation of George IV. Then, inside the abbey, she was crowned with a modified version of Queen Mary's crown, reset with stones from the royal collection, including the Cullinan 3 and 4 diamonds, two of the most famous stones in the world. By every objective measure, Camilla was wearing history. By every emotional measure, none of it landed. The public watched, the cameras rolled, and the overwhelming response from royal watchers, from ordinary viewers, from people who had followed this family for decades was a quiet, uncomfortable flatness. Because everyone watching knew what those pieces were not. They were not Diana's. Here is the core question this chapter is built around. Was Camilla ever given a genuine chance to build her own jewelry legacy? Or Was she handed pieces that carried other women's stories and expected to make them her own? The answer matters, because it tells you whether what happened to Camilla was deliberate exclusion or simply the unavoidable weight of history. And once you look at the evidence, the answer becomes very clear. This is the piece most people recognize even if they do not know its name. It appears on British postage stamps and currency. It was worn by Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth II, and several consorts across 2 centuries. It is undeniably significant. But here is what it is not. It is not associated with Diana. Diana never wore it. It was not part of her visual vocabulary. It carries no emotional charge for the generation of people who grew up watching Diana navigate her marriage, her heartbreak, and her humanitarian work. When Camilla wore it, the public saw a crown on a head. When Catherine wore the lover's knot tiara at a state banquet 6 months later, the public saw Diana. That gap, that enormous unbridgeable gap between institutional significance and emotional resonance. That is the story of Camilla's jewelry position in one sentence. Now look at the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. This is where it gets genuinely complicated. The tiara was made in 1893 as a wedding gift for the future Queen Mary. It passed to Queen Elizabeth II as a personal gift from her grandmother. Elizabeth wore it constantly in her early reign. It became one of her signature pieces. Diana also wore it, regularly and visibly. When Elizabeth died in September 2022, the tiara passed to Charles as part of the private royal collection. Charles directed it to Camilla, and when Camilla wore it publicly for the first time, something unexpected happened. The response was not warm. Royal watchers noticed immediately that Diana had worn the same tiara. Comparisons were instant and unflattering. Headlines placed photographs of Diana wearing it side by side with Camilla wearing it. Diana won every single comparison, not because Camilla looked wrong in it, but because Diana had worn it with that particular electricity she brought to everything. That quality of making a piece of jewelry feel like a conversation. Camilla wore it correctly, regally, appropriately, but correctly is not the same as unforgettably. And the public, trained by 30 years of Diana's visual language, knew the difference immediately. Here is the micro loop worth following closely. Why did Charles give Camilla a tiara so heavily associated with Diana? There are 2 possible explanations. The first is that he simply did not think it through, that the tiara was significant, historically important, and available, so he directed it to his wife without considering the inevitable comparisons. The second explanation is more uncomfortable. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was attempting to overwrite Diana's association with the piece by placing it on Camilla's head, to create a new chapter in the tiara's story, to move the narrative forward. If that was the strategy, it failed completely. You cannot overwrite Diana, not with a crown, not with a tiara, not with any institutional decision made in a palace office. The public does not work that way. Beyond the tiaras, look at what Camilla received in terms of personal pieces. She brought her own jewelry into the marriage, pieces from her previous life, gifts from Charles during their long relationship, items of personal significance that had nothing to do with the royal family's complicated history. Some of those pieces are beautiful. Some are historically interesting in their own right. But they do not carry the weight of Diana's collection. They do not stop traffic. They do not make front pages. They do not cause the public to feel something unexpected when they appear on a wrist or around a neck. Camilla's personal jewelry tells her story, a story of a woman who loved a man for decades, who waited, who endured extraordinary public hostility, who finally stood beside him at the altar in April 2025 and became what she had been told she could never be. That is genuinely a remarkable story. But it is not Diana's story, and Diana's story is the one the world is still watching. This is the brutal reality Camilla has had to live with since the coronation. She has the title, she has the crown, she has the official position and the royal household and the staff and the ceremonial authority. What she does not have is emotional real estate. Diana occupied a space in the public's heart that no institutional appointment can fill. The pieces Diana wore are not just jewelry, they are monuments. Each one carries a specific memory, a specific moment, a specific feeling that millions of people share. When Catherine wears those pieces, she activates that feeling. When Camilla wears anything else, even something historically extraordinary, she is simply well dressed. There is no version of this story where Camilla wins the jewelry comparison. Because the comparison was never really about jewelry, it was about love, about loss, about a woman the world adored and never got enough of. And those feelings do not transfer with a title. They never did. But here is what nobody has asked loudly enough yet. Who actually engineered this outcome? Because Camilla's exclusion from Diana's collection did not happen by accident. Somebody made sure of it, and that somebody had both the legal authority and the personal motivation to make it permanent. There is a moment William has spoken about publicly only once. He was standing in Kenya on October 2010, rucksack on his back, Catherine beside him. The Rift Valley stretched out ahead of them. He had been carrying his mother's ring for 3 weeks, 3 weeks in a rucksack, through game reserves and mountain terrain, because he was too nervous to leave it anywhere else, too afraid of losing the one piece of his mother he had decided to give forward. When he finally proposed, he placed that ring on Catherine's finger, and in that single gesture, quiet and private and completely unannounced, William settled a question the palace had been too uncomfortable to ask out loud. Who gets Diana's legacy? He answered it himself, without a committee, without a courtier, without asking his father's permission. He answered it the way Diana would have wanted it answered, on his own terms. To understand William's role in this story, you have to understand something about who he is. He is not a man who makes noise. He does not give speeches about his feelings. He does not call press conferences to announce his decisions. He does not leak to journalists or brief palace sources about his intentions. He acts, quietly, deliberately, with the patience of someone who has been watching how power works inside this institution, since he was old enough to understand what institution he had been born into. And the actions he has taken regarding his mother's collection tell a story more clearly than any statement ever could. When Diana died in August 1997, her estate was placed in trust for William and Harry until they came of age. William turned 30 on June 2012. By that point, the division of Diana's personal effects between the brothers had already been quietly managed. The specific details of who received what have never been fully disclosed. The palace does not publish that kind of information. Diana's executors handled the process privately, as any family would, but the outcomes are documented in plain sight. William received the engagement ring. He received stewardship of several key pieces that subsequently appeared on Catherine at major public events. He retained the authority to decide where his mother's most significant possessions would live going forward. Harry received other pieces. The aquamarine ring that Diana wore on her final public engagement appeared on Meghan Markle at the reception following their wedding on May 2018. Harry made that choice in conscious tribute to his mother. Both brothers understood what they were doing. They were not distributing jewelry. They were deciding where Diana's story would continue. Here is the micro question this raises immediately. Did William and Harry coordinate these decisions? Or did they each act independently, guided by their own grief and their own sense of what their mother would have wanted? Based on everything that has emerged from both brothers over the years, the answer appears to be both. In the years when their relationship was intact, before the fractures that became public in 2020 and beyond, William and Harry operated as a unit when it came to their mother's memory. They launched the Diana Award together. They commissioned the statue at Kensington Palace together. They spoke about her publicly with a coordinated intentionality that suggested ongoing conversation about how her legacy should be managed. The jewelry decisions fit that pattern. Each brother directed specific pieces toward the woman beside him, each piece chosen to carry Diana forward into the next chapter of the family's story. What is significant is what neither brother directed toward Camilla. Nothing, not a loan, not a gesture, not a single piece offered as a bridge between the past and the present. That absence was not an oversight. Now, look at what William has done beyond the ring. The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara was not William's to give outright. It belonged to the royal collection under the sovereign's control, but when Queen Elizabeth decided to lend it to Catherine after the Wales wedding, William supported that decision actively. Sources close to the couple have indicated that Catherine's connection to the Lover's Knot tiara was not simply a matter of it being available. It was a matter of it being chosen, deliberately requested, worn at specific occasions with specific awareness of what it communicated. William understood the symbolism. He has always understood the symbolism. He grew up inside the most symbolically loaded family in the world. He watched his mother use every appearance, every outfit, every piece of jewelry as a form of communication. He absorbed that education completely. When Catherine wears the lover's knot tiara to a state banquet, William knows exactly what the photograph will look like the next morning. He knows what the headline will say. He knows what the public will feel. He is not passive in that process. He is its architect. Here is the deeper truth this chapter is really about. William has never made a public statement against Camilla. Read that again. Never. Not once. Not in any interview, any authorized biography, any leaked briefing. He attended his father's wedding to Camilla on April 2025 with Catherine beside him. He has appeared alongside Camilla at official events with civility and appropriate warmth. He has conducted himself publicly with the kind of measured professionalism that reflects someone who has made peace with a complicated reality. But there is a significant difference between accepting a person and handing them your mother's legacy. William has done the first. Carefully, consistently, he has not done the second. And he never will. Because here is what William understands that no palace press secretary can put into a briefing document. Diana's collection is not jewelry, it is evidence. Evidence that his mother existed, that she mattered, that she shaped the course of the British monarchy in ways that no institutional decision can rewrite. Placing that evidence in Catherine's hands was not an act of war against Camilla. It was an act of devotion toward Diana. The distinction matters enormously, because it means Camilla was never the target. She was simply never the point. William controlled the outcome of this story the moment he put that ring on Catherine's finger in Kenya. Everything that followed, every tiara, every pearl, every carefully chosen appearance was already written in that moment. He did not block Camilla. He simply chose his mother. And in the quiet arithmetic of royal inheritance, that choice was absolute. One chapter remains. And it is the one that explains why all of this matters beyond the palace walls. Why the public reads every piece Catherine wears as a continuation of something unfinished. And why the most powerful jewelry in the world is not the crown jewels locked in the Tower of London. It is a sapphire ring on the left hand of the future Queen of England. On November 2022, Catherine walked into a state banquet at Buckingham Palace. She was wearing the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara, Diana's tiara, the one Diana had worn 15 times across a decade of public life. The room was full of dignitaries, world leaders, diplomats, people who had seen every kind of ceremonial grandeur the British state could produce. None of that was the story the next morning. The story was about Catherine, the tiara, and the woman every single person in the world immediately thought of when they saw it, Diana. The photograph went everywhere. Within hours, it had circled the globe. Every major publication ran it. Social media produced millions of reactions. And not one of those reactions was about state diplomacy. Every single one was about a mother, a legacy. A woman who had been gone for 25 years and somehow walked back into the room. That is the power this story is actually about. Here's the question worth sitting with before we go further. Why does the public respond this way? Why does a piece of jewelry worn by a princess in 2022 produce an emotional reaction that belongs to 1987? The answer is not complicated, but it is profound. Human beings do not separate objects from the people who made them meaningful. We are not wired that way. When you see your grandmother's ring on your mother's hand, you do not just see a ring. You see your grandmother. You feel the specific weight of her absence. You feel the comfort of something continuing. Diana trained the entire world to feel that way about her jewelry. 30 years of front pages, 30 years of state banquets and royal tours and charity visits and divorce hearings, all documented, all photographed, all filed permanently in the collective memory of hundreds of millions of people. Every piece she wore became a chapter in a story the public memorized without trying. And now, Catherine is wearing those chapters, one by one. Look at the data behind the public response. When Catherine wore the sapphire engagement ring at the Earthshot Prize ceremony in Boston in December 2022, the coverage of that event was dominated by the ring. Not the prize, not the environmental work William and Catherine had spent years building, the ring. Publications that cover royal fashion reported traffic spikes of hundreds of % on articles about Diana's engagement ring every time Catherine appears wearing it at a high-profile event. The Lover's Knot tiara produces the same effect every time it appears. Online searches for Diana spike within hours of Catherine wearing it. Social media engagement on photographs featuring the tiara consistently outperforms engagement on photographs of Catherine in any other piece. These are not sentimental reactions. They are measurable, documented, repeatable. The public is not just remembering Diana when they see those pieces on Catherine. They are actively seeking her out. Now, compare that to the public response when Camilla wears her coronation pieces. The George IV state diadem, the modified Queen Mary's crown, the historically significant pieces Charles directed toward her. The coverage is respectful, often detailed, occasionally admiring, but it does not produce that spike. It does not make people search for someone they lost. It does not activate grief and love and longing simultaneously. It does not stop traffic on the internet within minutes of appearing. It lands as a ceremony, important ceremony, appropriate ceremony, but a ceremony nonetheless. And ceremony, however magnificent, does not move people the way memory does. Here is the macro loop this entire script has been building toward. From the moment we opened this story, the real question was never about jewelry. It was about emotional inheritance. Who gets to carry the feeling Diana created? Who gets to be the vessel for the love the public poured into her and never fully recovered from pouring? The title, the crown, the official position. Those went to Camilla. But emotional inheritance cannot be assigned by a palace courtier or directed by a sovereign's private secretary. It goes where the public sends it, and the public has sent it, with extraordinary consistency and remarkable clarity, to Catherine. Think about what Catherine has built over the past 14 years. She did not arrive as Diana's heir. That was never her stated role. She came in as William's partner, quietly, carefully, with the kind of measured restraint that the palace had learned was necessary after the chaos of the previous generation. She built her public identity piece by piece. The early years were about establishing credibility, showing up consistently, demonstrating that she understood the weight of what she was stepping into. Then came the jewelry, not all at once, not with a press release or a palace announcement, gradually, thoughtfully, at moments chosen with precision. The engagement ring was there from the beginning. It was impossible to separate from Diana the moment it appeared on Catherine's hand. But the other pieces came later. The lover's knot tiara after she became more established in her public role. The pearl pieces at moments of particular national significance. The aquamarine ring at private events, seen in photographs but not paraded. Each addition to Catherine's Diana repertoire was timed, considered, placed, and each one deepened the connection the public was already drawing instinctively. Here is the uncomfortable truth this chapter arrives at. Camilla was always going to struggle with the public. Her history with Diana is documented, discussed, and permanently accessible in an age where nothing is forgotten and everything is searchable. The public's complicated feelings about Camilla are not going to be resolved by a coronation or a title change or a palace communication strategy. They are certainly not going to be resolved by jewelry. But here is what makes Catherine's position genuinely extraordinary. She did not create this situation. She did not campaign for Diana's legacy or maneuver politically to position herself as its keeper. She simply loved William. She wore his mother's ring. She accepted the tiara when it was offered. She wore the pearls at the moments that felt right. And the public, hungry for Diana's story to continue somewhere, in someone, did the rest. They made Catherine the keeper, not the palace, not William's legal authority over his mother's estate. The public. Millions of ordinary people who loved Diana and needed somewhere to put that love after she was gone. They put it in Catherine. And every time Catherine walks into a room wearing those pieces, they feel it again. That specific ache, that specific warmth, the feeling that something important did not disappear completely on the 31st of August, 1997. That it survived, that it is still here, just on a different hand, around a different neck, beneath a different crown. But unmistakably, undeniably, still Diana. The crown sits on Camilla's head. That is real, that is official, that is constitutionally settled. But the jewelry that makes the world feel something when a royal woman enters a room, that belongs to Catherine. It belonged to her the moment William placed his mother's ring on her finger in Kenya. It has belonged to her every day since. And everyone inside that palace, every courtier, every senior royal, every aide who has watched the public response data roll in after every major appearance, knows it. Camilla won the title, Catherine inherited the legacy. And in the court of public opinion, which is the only court that ultimately decides the monarchy's future, legacy is everything. Diana built something that no palace protocol could contain, not while she was alive, not after she was gone. She built a legacy so powerful that 28 years later, the world still stops when it walks into a room. It walks in on Catherine's wrist, around Catherine's neck, on Catherine's left hand. Camilla has the crown, but the thing that actually moves people, that was never up for grabs. It was always Catherine's. And deep down, everyone in that palace knew it from the beginning. If this story made you think, drop your opinion in the comments. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who follows the royals.